After 4 years of war, and with Americans becoming increasingly disenchanted, the United States' continued military involvement in Iraq dominates national discourse.
Many American troops have died in a situation that doesn't make sense. I can't believe people have waited this long.
We cannot allow our nation to be defeated in Iraq by the same Islamist extremists who attacked us on 9/11.
Most Americans agree that the U.S. has major national interests in the Middle East: oil, the fight against anti-American terrorists, the prevention of nuclear proliferation, and the continued effort for Arab-Israeli peace. The source of disagreement: is the U.S. military presence in Iraq helping or hurting U.S. national interests? When President George W. Bush made the decision to go to war in Iraq in March 2003,
the risks of inaction would be far greater.
Iraqi conventional forces were no match for American smart weapons, superior communications, and real-time intelligence. Within weeks, the regime of Saddam Hussein had collapsed. The Bush administration hoped regime change in Iraq would be the first step in the transformation of the Middle East. Iraq would become a pro-American democracy. Radicalism would be put on the defensive. But American military might has been unable to provide basic security in the aftermath of the collapse of the Iraqi regime. In 2005, Iraqis went to the polls and elected a new government to great fanfare. But the government, now headed by Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, has failed to provide political stability, and itself seems mired in sectarian divisions and on the verge of collapse. Meanwhile, al-Qaeda has established a growing presence in the country, and the violence has grown as Iraqis have organized along sectarian and ethnic lines. In early 2006, an attack on a major Shiite mosque signaled the onset of a new stage of warfare between Sunnis and Shias. President Bush also expressed concern that Iraq's neighbor Iran was providing weapons and training to Shiite militants while continuing its own nuclear programs. By the summer of 2007, American optimism for the region had been replaced by efforts to avoid full-scale civil war in Iraq, contain the sectarian violence, and prevent neighboring Sunni Shia powers with their own interests from interfering in Iraq. Some cost estimates for the war: $275 million a day, and if such long-term expenses as amortizing equipment, retraining troops, and providing ongoing medical care are added,
the total cost of the war would be between $1 and $2 trillion.
A bipartisan Iraq study group recommended spring 2008 as a target date for withdrawal of most combat troops and called for active diplomatic engagement in the region. President Bush rejected the two principal recommendations of the study group, but did make changes in his Iraq management team. Shortly after the 2006 midterm elections, he brought in a new Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, selected a new ambassador to Iraq, Ryan Crocker, and named General David Petraeus as his new force commander. The president announced that he would send 30,000 more troops to Iraq in what became known as the Surge, to help buy time for the beleaguered Iraqi government. President Bush's new team promised to take an objective look at the U.S. presence in Iraq, which set the stage for their September report. 7 months after the surge began, Petraeus and Crocker testified there has been measured military success, but very little corresponding political progress in Iraq. Petraeus said troop levels could be reduced to pre-surge strength by next summer, which would leave about 130,000 U.S. troops in Iraq. Petraeus also said any discussion of further reductions was premature. Since the war began, more than 3,700 American troops and tens of thousands of civilians have been killed in Iraq.